Well, thank you very much, Ron, and thank you for having us here again this year. It's a remarkable testament to you, given the economic meltdown that's taken place, that you've got such a good turnout here this year. I actually don't see too much difference than last year. Things are definitely, conferences are suffering, and it's a testament to the quality of this conference that you've got so many people out here. It's a real pleasure to be here in Vancouver. Gorgeous weather compared to back home in Toronto. I don't know how many of you are from the east, but we've had, I don't think we've had very many days over 22 or 23 Celsius this summer. In fact, it's still spring in Toronto, and it's still raining. We're still waiting for summer to arrive. I want to talk this morning a little bit about the Geoweb and in particular talk about GIS in the context of the Geoweb. But before I do that, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about what are the things that are driving the Geoweb. This has become very much a worldwide community, a growing worldwide community. There's many interests and disciplines, and all of you come from many different backgrounds. Some of you are computer scientists, some of you are practitioners in various earth sciences and urban sciences and planning. And all of us are brought together around the Geoweb by a number of driving forces that I believe are driving us towards better geographic knowledge. Our physical world, a better understanding of our physical world, better understanding of our economic world. We can certainly see from the events of last fall and this spring in the economic world that we do not understand our economy. The experts are baffled. And in fact, Malcolm Gladwell, the author of Blink and the Tipping Point, has written a very good article. I think it's either in the New Yorker or Harper's Magazine this month about what went wrong, and the answer is nobody knows. And we also don't really understand our social world very well, as we see the dramatic changes that are taking place around the world. And so this driving force of better geographic knowledge of our physical, economic, and social world. We also have a driving force towards operational efficiency. In governments, in businesses, and with citizens themselves, looking for more efficient ways to operate. Garmin, for instance, just published a study recently that said people who have a Garmin GPS in their cars drive about 10% less mileage, even though they actually don't change any destinations. We have a glass. Pardon me. That's actually quite amazing that they, thank you. That's actually quite amazing that that amount of efficiency would just come from having a navigation system. We're also looking at the global supply chain, constantly looking for greater efficiency. I'm in the midst of reading a book by an author, Paul Roberts, called The End of Food. And he wrote a book about 5 or 6 years ago called The End of Oil. And neither of them are about food disappearing or oil disappearing. They're about the industry and the changes, the driving forces and change. And in the case of food, the big one is a global supply chain now, where food is coming from all over the world, and a huge drive for efficiency by the big stores. Another driving force is modeling the future. Climate change is high on the list of everybody, remarkably high on the list of everybody's agenda. Although I just read in the paper yesterday that among Canadians, it's now dropped to number 3 behind the economy. The economy is an issue. How do we model the economy, since it's now this global economy that where geography plays a far, far more important role than it did, say, 100 years ago? How do we model the future of our society? Older societies are shrinking. Young societies are growing. And how do we model our infrastructure? So all of you here in this room are on the vanguard of making the Geoweb work and being driven by all of these forces. And we have many, many challenges in our world. We need to implement an information structure that's going to allow us to have a sustainable future in our world. Many people are seriously concerned that humanity as we know it will not survive People will survive, but it won't be the same world unless we can make it more sustainable. A few weeks ago, I was down to see a lecture by James Lovelock. James Lovelock is the developer of the Gaia theory, and it was very interesting. He talked about the potential for radical change in the climate, a jump, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that would cause the world to shrink, the world to sustain maybe only 1 billion humans. And it's really a major issue in our world today. Air pollution is a local problem until it's carbon dioxide. Then it becomes a global problem, as it did with CFCs. We see rapid changes in ice cover. We see sea levels rising significantly. We see species threatened all over the world as their habitat disappears. We see major changes in population around the world. We see countries like Afghanistan trying to be brought into not just the 21st century, but the 20th century, and Zimbabwe. We see protests on property tax. These are all issues that are perfect issues for the Geoweb to deal with. In fact, I was at the USRI user conference in San Diego 2 weeks ago, and Hernando de Soto, who Bill Clinton has called the greatest living economist in the world, believes that property rights and the mapping people's property and giving them a title is the key to developing an economy and a society in this third world that functions as well as our Western society does. Planning is changing radically as the Geoweb emerges. Planning for things like wireless networks, major activity going on around the world as we've now reached almost 2 billion cell phones in use, expected to grow by 700 million in the next couple of years. Looking for solar power potential, again, a major issue. I'm going to show something about that just a little bit later. Planning for economic development, planning to conserve our habitat, planning for agricultural capability. Where are we going to grow the food as the Great Plains of the interiors of our continents change and become so much drier? As the climate changes, natural disasters become larger. How do we respond to these natural disasters, whether they're huge floods or hurricanes or fires? We see maybe it's what David Phillips, the chief meteorologist for Environment Canada, calls the CNN effect. There really aren't any more disasters, but we're hearing about them a lot more. In fact, he went so far as to say that he calls them storm porn, where CNN insists on don't downgrade it to a Category 3 yet. Our truck is just arriving. Keep it at a Category 5, because we have to report on it. But the reality is, I think, that natural disasters are getting worse. And we need to be able to respond to them as the populations are denser and denser along coastlines. We have enormous assets around the world that are not well managed. In fact, certainly in Canada, and I think across North America, cuts to government spending, in particular at the local level over the last 20 years, have resulted in a dramatic drop in quality of our infrastructure, just as a lot of it is reaching the end of its useful lifetime. So we have an enormous task ahead of us at documenting this infrastructure, identifying where the opportunities are to improve it and replace it. The Council of Consulting Engineers of Canada has estimated that our infrastructure deficit in Canada, money that should have been spent but wasn't spent since the mid-90s, is in the order of $117 billion. Oil infrastructure around the world. We're running out of oil, but there's huge pressure to sustain it because there's $10 trillion worth of undepreciated oil infrastructure around the world. More and more people are starting to look at managing the insides of their buildings as well. Before they'd just been done on paper with old drawings that may not necessarily be accurate.